Welcome to Highlighted, a Life Church Midweek Podcast. Here we're on a journey to look for ways to make our sermons practical in our everyday lives and want to inspire you to live out your faith every day, not just on Sundays. In each episode, we highlight our sermons and ministries to see how God is working in our church and our community. Now, as you may have noticed, I'm here today not with Paul, who would not need a script to read that because he has it memorized, but I'm here with Baba, who we tried to get to memorize, but for whatever reason, he decided he wasn't going to do it.
No, man. It's almost like you threw it in front of me 5 minutes before we started recording.
Absolutely. But yeah, so this is the first time Baba's on the podcast with us, so welcome to Highlighted.
Yeah, glad to be here. It's almost like, I was being left out by somebody. Paul, when you edit this,
If he puts himself in the chair,
okay,
but your voice,
okay,
then we'll know there's a real problem.
Okay, yeah, that's true.
Until then, it's okay.
Yeah.
So we just finished up our Devoted series, and so super excited about even the last portion of this because the reality is that we didn't talk a whole lot about money in the series, but we were all around it until this week, and we kind of dug into what it means to trust God with our finances and with our money. We looked at two different stories. We kind of pitted these two stories against each other. We looked at the woman who gave like the very small, minute offering, almost nothing, as opposed to the rich young ruler. And we talked about what it means to be devoted with our treasure. So the whole series was about this idea that to be devoted, we have to trust God with every aspect and piece of our life. Really hard to do. Super difficult. And most of us do well in one or two or maybe even three areas, but to get like all five of these areas, it's really hard.
Yeah, I think like the hardest part for me is like actually trying to make sure that like when we're doing these things, we're not doing these things in vain. Because like some of the times, like I think like we do aspects of it, but then some of the times like I feel like we do aspects of it just so we can be noticed for it. Yeah. And like what we kind of see throughout the scriptures and what we kind of see throughout like what Jesus talks about is that like you should be doing these things because this is the way that you should live, because like we, even when we were talking about the lady who gave her last money, like, I mean, she gave like a little bit or whatever. And just like you were talking about on Sunday, like, I mean, like there were these people that were giving all this money and just being like, yeah, let's throw it in there. Let's have this big old parade about it and all that type of stuff. But they weren't doing it because they actually cared about God. It was because they wanted to get attention for it. And Jesus saw that and said, wow, there's something more important about the offering that she's giving because it's actually like out of her heart. It's not just out of her trying to get attention.
Yeah. It was strange to me in the scripture that Jesus is sitting by the offering boxes and watching this happen. But then as he explains why he's there and he kind of tells the disciples what's happening, you begin to understand this woman had a life that was so devoted to what she believed in, the God that she believed in, that she was willing to give absolutely everything and not sound the trumpets about it. So we talked about that. The shape of the offering box was such that when you dropped money in it, it kind of echoed out the sound. And you were talking about people, just now, you were talking about people doing, a lot of times we do things for recognition and for what we can get back from it. And that was kind of what was happening. These people were trying to make the trumpet sound. Look at me, look at me, look at me. And that's not really about being devoted to God. That's about being devoted to yourself. That's about me saying, I want everyone to pay attention to what I'm doing, not pay attention to what anybody else is doing or what this money could do or what it means for eternity, right? When we were talking about this series, you said something so when we, just in case you wonder the process, and a lot of times I'll sit down and work on a series and we talk very briefly about it. But in this particular instance, we were in a staff meeting and I said, okay, guys, we have this series coming up. I need some feedback. I need some help here. I'm struggling with getting exactly where we want to be. And you specifically brought up this idea of return on investment from an eternal standpoint. I don't know if you remember that or not, but I put that in my notes with your name and held on to it.
Don't act like you gave me credit for something.
I did. It's
okay.
in there, yeah.
Okay.
And that way, if it just like tanks, I can also blame you. That's more importantly why I do that.
Yeah. First tip in leadership.
have a scapegoat. No, just kidding. Don't do that. Although there is no, never mind. We'll talk about it later. But you said that you were talking about this that as we're talking about being devoted, as we talk about being good stewards, that there is an eternal return. It's hard to say. An eternal return on investment that we don't give enough credit for in our lives, that we don't think about. And so, we're talking about money, we're talking about resources, we're talking about understanding and talents and skills and all these things. And the reality is that when we are devoted to God and we steward those things well, our time, our resources, our understanding, our skills, and our treasure, when we allow God to do what only God can do with those things, and we quit acting like we own our time. Right. One of the things I hear all the time and I say all the time is, man, I'm tired. I just want to rest. Right. And God literally built rest into who we are and into what he expects of us. But I don't always steward that rest well. And so that comes back to this time thing we talked about, 5 weeks ago. But then you fast forward and that time when we steward it well, it has this eternal reward with it.
Yeah.
That we don't always think about when we think about how we spend our time or how we spend our money.
Yeah, and I think like some of it too is I think sometimes like as far as even going to what I was talking about earlier about like how we can sometimes get into this thing where we want all this like attention for the things that we do. The other thing that can sometimes happen is that we start to kind of have this like almost like prosperity gospel mindset where like we only want to give so that we can get, you know. Like, oh, if I give this, then God will give me 7 times back. And I think like some of the times we don't recognize that like the stuff that we give is not for that purpose. The stuff that we give will bless us, but blessings don't always mean money. Blessings don't always mean more resources. Blessing doesn't always mean more time, but sometimes blessing is like giving you peace. Because even when we look at like the Beatitudes, where Jesus was talking about, blessed are those who thirst for the kingdom of God, and all these different things, and he starts talking about all of these different ideas. We see that being blessed doesn't always just mean like having all of these resources, having all of these time, having all these talents. I tell students all the time, I'm like, look. I need you guys to be able to do what you guys do because I'm not good at everything. And I will give God my everything, but my everything is not enough. My everything can just be able to do a little bit, and God can work with that, but God can work with more when all of us are giving our everything.
Yeah, that's good. I think that as you kind of unpack that a little bit, and as you look at how your life unfolds, like we can find blessing if we're looking for it, right? Just as well as you can find curse if you're looking for it. Like you're going to find what you're looking for, right? And so even with my kids, even with myself, like I've challenged myself to look for the blessings of God, even when they're not super apparent, right? When things are tight, how is God financially? How is God blessing in other ways? When things don't feel right or I'm sick or whatever, okay, but how is God blessing in these other ways? And then if you can't find any of that, we always know that there is this eternal thing. Like I'm convinced that there are going to be people that we don't know in heaven because of things that we did. God using the things that we did and we stewarded well to lead people to him that maybe we don't even know. Maybe we've never even come, or maybe we came in contact with one time and did something just small and seemingly insignificant, but showed the love of Christ enough that a person can be led to that.
To me, when you said that, it kind of reminded me of that whole theory. I think it's called like the butterfly effect or whatever, where like you take out a butterfly so many years behind or whatever, you don't know like the effect it'll have on the future or whatever. And sometimes I think like we look at like our lives and think that like the little things that we have, that they're so small. Will this be able to make an impact? Will this be able to do anything? But we actually don't know how much this stuff compounds,
right?
And over time, like something little can turn into something big. It's that snowball effect or whatever. Like, like you just keep rolling it and keep rolling it. And then before you know it, it turns into something large, and like it can turn into something very significant. And I think that like a lot of us, we don't have we maybe don't feel like we have a lot of resources. We maybe don't feel like we have a lot of time. Maybe don't feel like we have a lot of talent or whatever. Like we don't feel like we have all these things, but God is like, look, do like you've seen what I've done with the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes.
Right.
You've seen what I've done with the oil in the jar with the widow. I'm trying to make sure.
Elijah.
I was trying to make sure it was Elijah,
Yeah.
not Elisha. But like all of these different things where God is just like, yo, I can be able to multiply this and I can make it something,
Right.
and like I think that like we sometimes overlook how significant the little things are,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, the little things are where we find the most control, right? And so, and this is really especially when we talk about our finances, we're talking about wanting to keep control of our lives. And so, these little things, like I think about the widow, like you brought up the widow, and I think about her, how easy it was for her to control. She said, I'm going to go make the last meal for me and my son, and then we're going to die. So she's controlling the narrative here. We're gonna die full, right? At least we're going to have this last meal. And yet we see when she finally does turn that over to God, when she chooses to turn that thing over to God, the last of what she has, something incredible happens, right? And they eat and they eat and they eat. And then the boy gets sick. And, the prophet's there and the question comes up, why would God supply the oil and the flour and then just let the boy die of sickness? And then so this small thing that she had control of, she let go of the control, and God did something incredible in the boy's life. And so I think sometimes we forget that it's these small areas like that we want to control so much, right? Like finances, it's a big part of our lives, but it's a small area of what God has asked us to steward. And when we're willing to give up the control of that and say, okay, God, here is every single dollar you've asked. I know what tithing is. I understand that. But also I believe the more we give to God, the more he can do with it. And so I'm not saying you should give every cent to your tithes or whatever, but I'm saying that it's an attitude of the heart. Right? God, every dollar I spend, I want to spend because you have ordained it to be spent in this way. Everything that I do, everything that I give to, everything that I put my effort and energy and time in, I don't want control of. I don't want to try to micromanage all of these areas of my life. I want to give them all over to you and let you have control. And then me step back and say, okay, I'm going to do what you've asked me to do.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me like how like people talk about like money. They say think about money as in like your time, like the amount of time that you put in at your job or whatever else. And you've got to think about like how much time would I be willing to put in to be able to see souls get saved?
Right.
How much time would I be willing to put in to see lost people come to Jesus? How much time would I be willing to put in order to see in order to see people just ultimately get their lives transformed by the gospel? Like, and so when we look at things that way, man, giving this little bit here, giving this little bit there, like that's time. Yeah. But I feel like most of us, if we knew that we were going to be able to change somebody's life, we'd be willing to give up an hour, And so like we give up like hours of our day all the time to everything else. But what if we gave up hours of our day to what God wants us to do?
Yeah.
What if we gave up our schedule so that it could be able to glorify God? What if we gave our bank account, the talents that we have in order to be able to glorify God? And so that's what I kind of see like as the kind of connecting thing between all of that.
Yeah, that's good. The question is, are we going to be devoted? Right? Are we going to steward well? And we started this whole series off with the parable of the talents and how, this master gave each three of his servants a set amount of money, and two of them doubled it, and there was this overwhelming blessing that happened, and they were put in charge of more things. As they let that money do what it does, they kind of took off the control, and by the time the master got back, they were able to double it. And then this third guy who says, I knew you were a harsh person, I knew you were a rough guy, and so I just buried your money. And as we've went along thinking about this, I thought one day we're all going to stand before God and we're going to have to give an account for our lives, right? We're blessed for those of us who know Jesus. We're blessed because Jesus is going to, in that, we know that regardless of what terrible things our life had, he's going to step in, okay? But as we give that account, I think it's going to be fair to look back and say, was I really devoted? Or did I simply want to control and keep all of this stuff? And in that moment, I think we're going to find that if we were like the third servant who just buried the money, it's almost like us saying to God, "Listen, I knew you were a tough God, and so I did just the bare minimum, and I did just enough to get me through, because I could mess up all that other stuff, and I don't want to be responsible for that."
Yeah, I think it's like I feel like I feel like a lot of the times, like sometimes we can think that like we're being humble almost if we have a approach like that. But I think sometimes we don't recognize that we are being even more prideful by thinking that like, hey, the earth and everything that I have in my hands could be able to do a little bit more with me than it can with God,
Right.
or like that, or to think that God isn't big enough that he can be able to do amazing and mighty things outside of our understanding.
Yeah.
Like I think like we kind of get too far into it, and then our brain like just doesn't recognize all the stuff that God can really do. And so I think that like one of the things that I've really tried to implement in my life to be able to help me is that like when I think about all of the things that God has given me, whether it's treasure, whether it's resources, whether it's time, I try to think, I'm like, man, what do I want to accomplish for God today?
Yeah.
You know, and like what do I really want to see happen in lives? And I remembered you were the one that really told me how to do this, is to set goals. I think like a lot of times we don't set goals, and so we're just kind of moving around aimlessly. And I tell students this all the time when I'm talking about relationships, because, you know, they're always like, oh, I want to date in middle school and high school. And I'm like, it's a bad idea. If y'all are watching this right now, it's a bad idea. But the reason why it's a bad idea is because a lot of people, they kind of go into relationships with no goals,
Right.
you know, and when you have no goal, you just kind of run around aimlessly and you don't make any scores. You don't make anything happen because now you're only thinking about like just like running around, basically. And I think that like we can do that with our money. We can do that with our time too. We don't have goals and things set in place in order to um, make the best out of what we have. And so now we're just kind of walking around aimlessly. We're just paying bills. We're just, you know, we're just like going through day by day. And I think that when we're on mission, I think that it helps us kind of, it revitalizes everything in our lives, because now we're doing something that like actually means something. Now we have a purpose and we have a plan, and now it feels like something. I always tell students this too, like when they're thinking about what career to go into. I'm like, what will give you joy? Like, what will be something that, like, if you were doing it right now, you'd be like, okay, well, even if I'm not like making a whole bunch of money, like I enjoy it and I feel like relieved to be able to be a part of that. And I think that we should do that same thing with all the things God has given us. Like we should be thinking, what can I give to right now, that even if I don't see immediate results, that I will still be able to see that this had a point in my life, and this did bless me, even if it doesn't like bring these like outward rewards.
Yeah. That's good. I like that. You know, it's one of those things where if we're going to be devoted, if we're going to be good stewards, then we're going to have to manage and set goals in those areas. And so therein lies kind of the final challenge of this series, is simply this: take these things and ask this question, you know, do I trust God? Right? Do I trust him so much that I'm willing to set goals for my time? So much that I'm willing to say, okay, God, I'm going to give you so much of my time. I'm going to set aside, not just for Bible study and those kind of things. You got to do that too, but also to go and do what you've commissioned me to do. I'm going to set aside time to go share the gospel with people. What does that look like? How does that, you know, and how would you make that happen, right? Is that having dinner with a friend? Is that going out and evangelizing in some way, shape, or form? Is that connecting with someone that doesn't know Christ, and whatever that might look like? But also in how you use your time, in are you devoted in your time, in your rest, and all these things. So that's the question. Do I trust God with my time? Do I trust Him with my resources, with the things that I own, things that people have given me, things that are already mine? Do I trust Him with my understanding of His Word and what my pastor's teaching and what I've learned, through other avenues? We have at our fingertips. It's the craziest time to live in ever in the history, because at our fingertips is basically all of history, and so here we are, and so. It's kind of a crazy moment, yet our understanding of what God has asked us to do and what He says in His Scripture becomes important. Do I trust Him with that? My skills and the abilities that I have, I'm blown away every Sunday by the level of talent and ability that we have in the building, from people doing phenomenal at making food, to leading Bible studies, to working and doing praise and worship and preaching and teaching and all the things that happen within our walls, but also outside. And then the final question for it is, what am I doing with my treasure? Can't take any of it with me, right? And so what is it that God has asked me to do? Am I devoted with it? Am I like the woman in the temple who was willing to give everything? Or am I more like the rich young ruler who is walking away from Jesus sad? And I think that's the question. That's where devoted lies. That's where the questions we're asking about this. Do I trust God completely with everything? And I think that's a question that we can't stop asking ourselves, because we're moving into a new series, right? We can't stop asking ourselves because pastor's preaching about something different or teaching about something different. This is a daily thing that we have to ask. Do I trust God with everything? Have I given it all over to Him? And the reality is that until we do, there's going to be areas of our life that we just keep Him out of. And so highlighted is also about some things that are coming up. We got some stuff coming up. What's happening?
Man, first thing I want to talk about is, I had to get on that real quick. Okay, we got Via Dolorosa coming up. If y'all don't know what Via Dolorosa is our crosswalk that we do every year. Me and a bunch of the students, we walk. This year, our route is 10 miles, and 10 miles. I had to think about it. It's going to be 10 miles, and we're going to be walking so that we can be able to, first, show people what Jesus did for them, 2, be able to raise money for Speed the Light, and thirdly, so that we can have a better understanding of what Jesus did for us. And so if you would want to support a student, then just let us know. We would love to be able to kind of connect you with a student that's going or whatever else. Then also we have Easter Fest coming up. It's actually before that. It's on April 12th. We're going to be having this big Easter egg hunt. We got thousands of eggs that we're hiding. We have egg hunts for kids all the way down to like nursery age, all the way up to teenagers. So if y'all teenagers out there, middle schoolers and high schoolers, y'all want to have an Easter egg hunt that your Aunt Shelly won't get mad at. If your name is Shelly, don't think I'm talking about you, but I'm just saying that whatever your aunt's
Calling
name
out
is.
the Shellys of the world.
I know, right? But whatever aunt you have that might criticize you for throwing elbows at these other kids, you can at least throw elbows at your friends. No, I'm just kidding. Don't throw elbows at your friends. But yeah, we have that going on, and we would love for you guys to be at that too. Then we have Good Friday service that's going to be going on, and then
Easter Sunday.
Yeah, and it's Easter Sunday. We got
Easter
a lot.
Sunday.
So
there's a lot happening in April, and as always, there's tons going on. So be sure to check out the website, connect with us, and have a great week.